Hello, and welcome to the Why Behind the Buy, a podcast for marketers focused on finding and targeting their ideal customers at scale. I'm your host, Monique Ruiz, and on this month's episode, we're talking about a topic that is extremely important to consumers and businesses alike: privacy. In the past few years, consumers have been very vocal about the need for more control over their personally identifiable information, or PII, and subsequent industry regulations have been enacted to meet their wishes. Unfortunately, for some businesses, this has made it harder for them to target new customers. Or has it? Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be speaking with Claritas' own Chief Technology Officer, Al Gadbut, who's been following this topic very closely because he's working with industry leaders to create best practices and guidelines to interpret the sometimes vague laws that have already come out. Plus, we'll hear from Steve Fuller at the Seattle Times on how one simple solution is helping them reach the ideal audiences for their own clients in a privacy-safe way to some pretty impressive results. First up, though, I'd like to welcome Al Gadbut. Al, thank you for joining me on the Why Behind the Buy.
Monique, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to talking with you today.
We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So, I think your title is fairly self explanatory, but what exactly does your role entail so our listeners can get a little bit of insight into your day to day life here at Claritas?
Right. So, in addition to normal technology-oriented operations and management, my big focus at Claritas has been on our identity and device graph, on privacy, and email in particular, as it both feeds the graph as well as it's becoming a more important revenue line here at Claritas. And email is not a very straightforward solution.
hmm
And as such, there's a lot of privacy issues there too that feed in very well with the same kind of privacy things we're dealing with on the graph.
So, since you're an expert on all things privacy and security, can you tell us what are some of the concerns that consumers have with companies having data on them, and what are they afraid of about their information being shared online?
Right. It's really strange in that consumers I don't think are aware of the vast amount of data that is being collected on them.
hmm
I don't think that they understand how connected the overall web really is. And people who work that backside of the web in order to provide the content that they are looking for, the consumer, I think, is oftentimes appalled at the amount of data that has been collected. And this type of consumer concern, that goes back 50 years before the internet. As people were collecting credit information. Why does an entity like an Experian or a TransUnion have to know whether I paid my bills at Macy's or not? That's a private thing between Macy's and I. And yet, from that, it delivers or it developed a credit score that allows you to get credit cards and go into a car dealership and buy a car without a wheelbarrow of cash. It's very similar in the online space. Is that by collecting a bunch of information about consumers, it allows marketers to be more efficient and provide better targeting to them, allows the marketer to create and serve offers in a more cost effective way, and hopefully makes the content that the consumer is seeing more valuable or more relevant to them. The downside is that there's just a vast amount of information that is being collected. And I think that by and large, most consumers would like to probably keep that private if they had a choice.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a fine line that marketers have to navigate from that personalization standpoint with customers and prospects, on top of needing to ensure that they're compliant with the industry regulations that have come out. But I'm
Yeah.
curious on that flip side, what are some of the other privacy compliance concerns that brands have or that they need to watch out for?
Right. Well, it's interesting because from a marketer standpoint or a company like Claritas, who is a data aggregator and doing data analysis,
hmm
we're at a point where we have the capacity to collect vast amount of data. And at some point, as a marketer or a provider of marketing solutions, you really have to ask the question: do I need to collect that data? We as a company have begun to look at those types of things and say, some of this stuff we just don't need. It's
Hmm.
available, but you don't need it. And furthermore, which I think more directly gets to your question, there's a downside. Not only if you lose control of that data and now you have to go and make some type of public disclosure that you've lost control of the data, and what data do you now have? If you're carrying a lot of data that you don't need, it really reflects poorly on you as a company. But more than that, now there's real teeth in some of these in state laws. Every state has data protection laws. So if we lose control of a national database, we have to go make report to the attorney general in each state, telling them that we lost control of the data, which opens us up to liability.
Wow.
Beyond that, there's now CCPA, which is a California Consumer Privacy Act, which gives the California consumer real rights to manage who has what data and what they can do with it. There's GDPR, which is the people say it's analogous to CCPA, but it's not. It's a different law. It's European based. It's very different in that GDPR is an opt-in law. You have to, and we all went through this when GDPR came online. As you went to a website, there was a pop-up that said we're going to use cookies. In order to
Right.
use this site, you have to accept so on and so forth. And if you didn't, then it went away, or you may not have gotten access to the site, what have you. Whereas CCPA is not about permission upfront; it's about managing the data that is collected. We've built all kinds of infrastructure, and we've gotten to the point where we have compliance, but it's still not a clear law where the lines are being drawn. And quite frankly, it probably won't be until after this gets litigated. And then beyond that, there's legislation that is going to pass in California and in Hawaii that makes location data, for example, off mobile devices, a requirement to be opt-in.
Right. Yeah, and I think the conversation around consumer privacy has shifted slightly in the wake of the pandemic, too. So, whereas earlier this year, there might have been more focus on how companies are targeting consumers to buy their products, for example, now there's a little bit of a growing concern over the new health tracking models that are being developed or have been developed. So, can you explain a little bit about what those health tracking models are and what exactly they're used for?
So this is the good and the bad of being able to track consumers. Your mobile device carries an ID on it. It also through the applications, and this is also something that's changing, but many applications have a built-in functionality that it will wake up and just send a ping off to the app manufacturer, telling them that you're still there, and it'll provide part of that ping provides a lat long,
Hmm.
and that lat long is pretty specific, down to 8 feet of where you're standing on the earth, and it does it every 2 to 3 minutes throughout the day. So if you're in bed sleeping, however many hours you're sleeping, there's a ping every 3 minutes, and so people can begin to get an idea that you're at home, you're at rest. You're not even walking around your home. You can see that people might be walking around their home. You can also see that people are out of their home. And
Hmm.
so people who are collecting this information, and by the way, we don't collect this information, but for people who were collecting this information, they were providing it to government agencies, giving them an opportunity to understand that when there was a stay-at-home order, what percentage of the population were paying attention? How many people were actually out running around? How many people were congregating together? What size groups were coming together? And it helped health officials begin to understand whether people were compliant with stay-at-home orders.
Right.
Without getting political about it, everybody can see that that could be a good thing and a bad thing.
Right. Right.
These companies actually provided this information free of charge to the government because they thought they were providing a public good. Another thing that, again, you can, without getting political about it, it turned out that some of the government or some of the parties that run the government got hold of this data, and they began being able to track who was showing up to protest for
Oh,
whatever
okay.
reason. And now they're able to understand not only your whether you what your feelings are about a particular issue, but whether you are so adamant about them that you're willing to go out and protest publicly about how upset you are. You can't do those things anonymously now. And I think a lot of people are upset about that. I know that as a result of this, there's been legislation that's been put forth in the House that significantly limits the use of this type of data for tracking consumers as they're expressing their own civil rights. But that hasn't passed, and it's not a law yet. But this is a situation where certainly government and parties are spying on people that I don't think they would approve of.
Now, on the good side, Claritas is involved somewhat in this initiative, right? So what have we done in this space with our work with for the White House? And
Right.
is there any valid concern from the consumer perspective there?
I don't believe there really is from
Okay.
in terms of how Claritas is providing information. Remember, Claritas is, and maybe this is a point where we can begin to dive into what does Claritas do. Claritas provides segmentation models
Yep.
for consumers. So it's done in a very privacy compliant way. There's no name and address information that is provided. There's no actually individual information that is
Right.
provided in our models. Everything is based on massive group behaviors that get divided up into one of 60, 50, or 60 buckets, depending on the model that's being applied. And then everybody falls into one of 50 or 60 general buckets. And it begins to give you an idea of whether there's some sort of collective behavior. What we're providing to the White House is that type of model, but you still need to apply that to somebody else's name and address information. So somebody else has to collect that actual name and address of group of consumers, a group of voters, against a group that has already been identified by somebody else.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue into what you just mentioned. We've talked about the concerns consumers and businesses have around privacy and security and what might be happening in the future. But I want to talk about some of those ways that companies can safely navigate both the current environment we're in with the pandemic and the laws and the regulations that have been coming out in recent years while still meeting their ultimate goals of identifying new customers and delivering their message to them.
Right.
So I would say leveraging segmentation is probably one of those simplest ways to achieve those goals, right?
I couldn't agree more. And the
Okay.
fact is, this is a position that Claritas has maintained this privacy compliant position for 40, 50 years that Claritas has been in business. In
Hmm.
part, it was a driver that helped initiate why Claritas got into business. And the position within the marketplace has been pretty well known and accepted. And we went through a period where the marketer was saying, "Well, I don't care about group behavior. I want to know what Monique Ruiz is doing. I want to know about
Hmm.
her, and I want to know not only her, but I want to know her whole family and her neighbors and so on and so forth. And then I want to make decisions based on what I know specifically." And and the fact is, I don't think that data tends to perform better than segmented data. The only difference is it's much more invasive.
Yeah, you just alluded to it again, but are you seeing some kind of common questions come up in conversation with clients around privacy and security as clients are having to basically reevaluate their third-party data, like segmentation, with the legislations that are coming
Yeah.
down?
It's interesting. Last year, we had so many meetings. Everybody was concerned about where CCPA is going.
Right.
And not only that, where potential legislation coming out of Washington might be, so on and so forth. The questions were all over the place, up and down the spectrum of is Claritas data privacy compliant and why? How does it impact GDPR? When we add your data to our data, does it change our data? And the answer is no, because
Mm.
there's nothing about our data that is specific to an individual. So you can apply our data to your data, and depending on whether your data is already considered PII, does it become more enhanced PII? If it's not PII. We won't make you PII. And that's really
Hmm.
an important thing. And then going into the fall, like I say, we're facing CCPA 2.0. One of the tenets of that ballot measure is going to create a super class of PII that's going to have even more liability around it and more requirements on the marketer and the aggregator of data to maintain and house that data. Fortunately, we're not in those spaces. So if that law and that ballot measure passes, and I anticipate it will, it won't impact us because we're not carrying that super class of data.
I think ultimately the bottom line is if you work with a reputable partner, segmentation has been and will continue to be a safe way to meet your objectives. Al, I want to thank you for joining me on the podcast and sharing all of that valuable information with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
So, we're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break. And when I return, I'll be joined by Steve Fuller from the Seattle Times to hear about how segmentation is helping their clients define their ideal audiences and target them with messages that achieve better sales results. In January of this year, Google announced a 2-year plan that will make cookies obsolete on its Chrome web browser. This extension of Google's privacy sandbox emphasizes transparency, choice, and control for internet users. But while this gives more control to the individual, it creates challenges for companies that offer identity resolution, audience targeting, and advertising effectiveness. To learn more about the impact of retiring third party cookies and how to evolve as a company to meet current and future standards, head over to claritas.com and click on the Insights tab to access our recent blog, Claritas Methodology Guards Against the Retirement of Third Party Cookies, authored by our very own CTO, Al Gadbut. We're back, and I'm now joined by Steve Fuller, a strategic research analyst from the Seattle Times. We asked Steve to be a guest today because he's an expert at helping clients win big by leveraging smarter solutions, like segmentation, for one. Steve, we're excited to have you on the Why Behind the Buy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So let me start by having you give us a little bit more about your background and, in your own words, what you do for the Seattle Times.
Well, I'm currently the strategic research analyst for the advertising department, which is now the media solutions department. I've primarily been overseeing the happenings in the Seattle Tacoma DMA for the past 22 years. I look at everything externally from client reach to segmentation to mapping to any kind of knowing what's going on in any segment of the market at any given time, just so the advertising department has a reference to what's happening.
Very cool. So, part of our conversation for this podcast episode has been around consumer privacy concerns and even the concerns that businesses have in this space, like ensuring they're working with safe, compliant data and adhering to privacy laws and regulations like CCPA and GDPR. So, what have the conversations been like in the media industry or with the clients that you serve?
Yeah, so the same kind of issues and concerns that you've heard are repeated to us.
Okay,
We are very strict about who we do business with and how they handle their data, as well as even the crossover from client to us. We signed NDAs for any kind of information that we get to make sure that everything is covered on all angles. We don't allow anything to slip through the cracks. We just we have the whole thing kind of boxed off.
it's good to know. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're still in the midst of a pandemic. So some states have started phase plans for reopening. I believe a few have fully reopened with some stipulations still in place. And then some other ones have reversed their plans, opting to go back down to more strict mandates for like brick and mortar locations when it comes to retail operations. So, from your perspective, for companies that have an e-commerce shop and a brick and mortar, do you have any tips on how they can both safely navigate those changing regulations that might limit their operations in some capacity with continuing to successfully grow their overall business?
Well, it's interesting. I've having been in this business for the time that I have, and I've been in business overall probably 45 years, one truth has become self-evident, and that's that from the start of business, from the first day you open till the day that you reach whatever pinnacle you're trying to reach or achieve, at some point along that timeline, you're going to come to a wake up call. It's
Mm.
the minute where everything for you changes, the way you think changes, the way you handle what you think changes. For retail and consumer service, this is that wake up call. COVID
Hmm.
19 is that thing that's going to change the way you do everything. Certainly you can attempt to follow the rules and guidelines that are put out forward for you for your brick and mortar operations, but the reality is no one has ever caught COVID-19 over the internet. So if you if you are not doing business online, if you don't have e-commerce capabilities, or you are not paying attention to them, you are making a huge error.
Yeah, you just alluded to this, but I know the newspaper industry has been through its own set of challenges with the changing needs of consumers, like the way that they actually consume media. So I'm curious, are there any lessons of the past with the way the Seattle Times or newspapers in general have adapted that companies struggling to succeed in this current environment can use as a guide of sorts for their own future direction?
Yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately for us at any rate, our circulation department, who deals with readers and who reads our products both print and online, started about 10 years ago with a methodology about how to price, how to put product together, to structure it to move us in this direction. So we've been
Hmm.
moving in this direction for almost a decade, and we're really good at it. And the numbers that we have now are fantastic. But the other thing that we did much later term was we actually used segmentation to look at our own clients and look at who was getting what type of delivery, what days they were getting it on, what type of product, and then that helped us align our thinking behind not only how we approached people in the circulation market, but how we sold our our advertising to our clients, because it gave us a much better insight to know who it would apply to. And
Hmm.
so I would say this to any business owner, and I've worked with a lot of them over the years. Um, you have to know who your customers are, and there are a lot of people out there that would like to tell you that they know who their customers are, but I have found probably that 75 to 80% of the people that I talk to believe the image they see in their rose-colored glasses. They see who it is they made their shop for. That's that's who buys from them,
Yep.
when in realization, looking, segmenting all of their customer base and looking at it, that makes up about 10% of their audience, and they're totally misrepresenting themselves either in language or in depiction in their advertising to the people that are actually should be their clients.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good segue into my next question. So, segmentation has been pretty key for the Seattle Times in helping your own clients find the highest opportunity audiences and reach them when and where they actually want to be engaged. Could you share with us a success story where a client met or exceeded their goals by leveraging segmentation?
Sure, I can give you a couple of quick stories.
Okay.
Probably one of our best ones was about a year and a half ago. There was a jewelry store, a high-end jewelry store in Seattle, that they did a few uh, like print flyer type things that were inserted, a couple times a year or whatever. I mean, it
Hmm.
didn't amount to a lot. And so we asked if we could do a segmentation drill down on their customer list, and they agreed. So we went ahead and I broke it all down. So we went through the whole process, and she goes, "Wow, this nobody has ever taken the time to do this." And I go, "Well, let's be honest." I said, you're spending like nearly $85,000 a year on advertising with TV and radio and the few flyers you have us doing, whatever, all the different things you're doing on the web. And how are your results? She goes, "Well, honestly, they're not very good." And I go,
Hmm.
"Okay, you know, we have this plan we'd love to do for you, but it would cost like $100,000 a year. We basically take it all over, and it would cost you $100,000 a year. And she looks at it and she's looking at the paperwork and she goes, okay, we're going to try it. And I said, okay. So we we ran those segments. We ran all the advertising based on those segments. We built the advertising look and feel and commentary based on the segments and how those people were spoken about within the descriptions. And at the end of the year, they came to us. They increased their contract by another 48,000 because there was a particular group that they wanted to focus more money on. But they had, she said, there was no month in the year they weren't 50% or more higher than the previous
Wow.
year when we took it over. And she has done video testimonials for the company. She has, I mean, that they are absolute believers. You know, they will be with us forever. Simply because we went in and said, you know, let's stop spending money where you don't need to spend it.
Right.
Let's spend money where you get return. You know, should you have some kind of overarching thing that everybody sees just so your name's out there? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of the money that you spend should be giving you a direct return for the money you're spending, or you're wasting money.
Exactly. Yeah, that's amazing story. Great for them and good
Yep,
again, good for you guys.
absolutely. Yeah, and I mean there are many more. I mean we have and I won't go into the whole thing, but we have a college, a private college up there that has like 8 different schools and combined within this private college. We did it for one school. We now have all 8.
Oh, wow.
So because every school went, oh man, you got to do this,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so there's no end to the value that it has given us and our customers, and it's like I tell them, if we're not making you money, then we're not doing our job right. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just that simple. If you have to come and question us where the results are, you shouldn't be with us.
Right. Good
I,
point.
you know, that's all there is to it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those stories. Those are great. So let me ask you now, there are companies out there that they haven't done any type of segmentation analysis on their CRM, or they haven't worked with the data provider to help them find success outside of their own capabilities. But what do you think the hesitation is, and what do you say to them to try to help them enhance their strategy?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is what we talked about earlier, and that was that people in sales functions or that think in sales functions get used to thinking the way they think and don't like to
Right.
change. That's the first thing. So changing people over time will change that. But the other thing is, I think that there is a lack of sophistication in a lot of the people that are handling data. They simply don't work on it at that level, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not that difficult. That it's if you're good at math and you have a little bit of logical thinking characteristics, it's not that difficult. Take the time, learn how segmentation works,
Yep.
learn what it looks like, build the impressions of what the people look like in your mind from the descriptions, so that you can speak about them as if they're your neighbor next door. And you know life is good. Like I said,
Yeah.
if you can save the client money and improve his results, what is he going to think about you? You know, I mean,
That's great advice.
yeah, you're always the good guy, and believe me, I like being the good guy. I've been the bad guy most of my life, so this is good for me.
I think that's a great spot to end our conversation today. I've really enjoyed talking to you and having you share your expertise with us for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Glad to talk to you.
So, Steve, if our listeners at home want to keep up with you or the Seattle Times, where can they go to get some more information?
Well, that's a good question. They can reach the Seattle Times, of course, get more information about the company, and there's even a link to me there. Would be http colon // mediakit.seattletimes.com.
Perfect. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes so anybody can access it through there too.
Great.
Well, thanks again, Steve. I appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Well, like I said, that is all the time that we have for today's episode. I do want to thank Al for joining us earlier to talk about privacy and security. And again, another thank you to Steve Fuller from the Seattle Times. As always, if you haven't already, we would love for you to subscribe to the Why Behind the Buy so you never miss an episode. Rate us 5 stars, share with a friend, and leave us a positive comment. If you enjoyed what you heard today and want to learn more, visit our website at www.claritas.com. And with that, we'll see you soon with a brand new episode. Bye now.